Rain hammered down on the city streets that night, turning the glittering lights of Manhattan into blurred streaks in the glassy pavement. Emily Parker stepped out of the revolving doors of the Waldorf Astoria, her black heels splashing through shallow puddles, her grip tight around a worn black tote bag that seemed far too heavy for her small frame. Her chest rose and fell with quick, uneven breaths, the fabric of her borrowed dress clinging to her from the damp air. She did not look back. Somewhere 20 floors above, in a corner suite, framed by gold drapes, Lucas Grant stood at the window, watching her go. He was the picture of control in his tailored gray suit, his hands buried in his pockets. Yet the faint tightening around his jaw betrayed something else. His eyes followed her into the night, a strange blend of disappointment and obsession brewing there. In his mind, she was just another woman who had taken the easy road to money, another name to be forgotten by morning. What he could not know was that for Emily, that black tote bag was filled not only with cash, but with the desperate hope that her little boy might live to see his next birthday. Hours earlier, she had been sitting in a cold hospital room, her 6-year-old son Ethan hooked to machines that hummed with a steady rhythm. The doctor had spoken with the practiced calm of someone used to delivering bad news, explaining that the only way to save Ethan was an immediate bone marrow transplant, the cost of which would reach $280,000. Emily had already sold her car, emptied her savings, and taken extra shifts at the architecture firm that had hired her only 2 months ago. She had even swallowed her pride to beg her former in-laws for help, only to be met with the same cold disapproval that had shadowed her since the day she married their son. They had never approved of her, and they would not open their wallets for her child. She had reached the end of every legal and moral option when she walked into Lucas Grant's office earlier that day and asked for an advance. His rejection had been as swift as it was cutting, and then came the offer disguised as a test one night in exchange for the money. Lucas had expected her to throw the proposal in his face. Instead, hours later, she was knocking on his hotel door, her eyes empty of emotion, her voice steady as she said she would take the deal. Now, as she disappeared into the rain, clutching the price of her dignity, Lucas did not know that the night he had imagined as a forgettable indulgence would be the one he would never be able to erase. 2 days before the rain-soaked night at the Waldorf Astoria, Emily had been sitting in the small break room of Grant Developments, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the clock on the wall as if sheer willpower could slow its relentless ticking. Every second felt like it pulled her further from a solution for Ethan. She had joined the firm only 8 weeks ago, stepping into the sleek high-rise offices with a mixture of gratitude and fear. The job was a lifeline after months of scrambling for freelance work, but it came with an unspoken rule she had learned during her interview: never mention children. Her friend Claire, who worked in accounting, had whispered the warning as they walked through the lobby on her first day that Lucas Grant, the CEO, was meticulous about hiring only people who could commit entirely to the company. It was not about skill, she had said, it was about focus, and in his mind, single parents could not offer it. So Emily had tucked away every trace of her life with Ethan into a locked corner of her mind, presenting herself as a single woman with nothing but ambition. It worked for a while until the day the doctor called and shattered the fragile balance she had built. The diagnosis had been swift and merciless: acute lymphoblastic leukemia, aggressive and demanding immediate treatment. At first, Emily had clung to the hope that insurance would cover the costs, but the reality was a brutal arithmetic that left her staring at numbers she could not reach. She had drained her savings within weeks, sold her sedan for a fraction of its worth, and taken on side projects that kept her awake until dawn. But the hospital bills towered higher with each passing day. GoFundMe donations trickled in, but never enough to bridge the gap. And when she finally stood in her former father-in-law's living room, with Ethan's medical records in hand, she had been met with a polite but unyielding refusal. Robert Whitmore was a man who believed in preserving appearances above all else, and Emily had never fit the picture he imagined for his late son. He had tolerated her during the marriage barely, and after the car accident that took his son's life, he had blamed her entirely. He would not acknowledge Ethan as his grandson, and certainly would not fund a transplant. The rejection burned, but there was no time to nurse the wound. Back at work, Emily typed the email that would change everything, requesting a private meeting with Lucas. She rehearsed her words in the elevator, clutching the folder of her recent architectural designs as if they could speak to her worth. Lucas sat behind his minimalist desk, a skyline of New York, stretching out behind him through the glass. He listened without interrupting as she explained her request for a salary advance of $200,000, her tone careful, her gaze steady. When she finished, there was a pause heavy enough to make the hum of the city below seem loud. Then Lucas leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You have been here less than 2 months," he said. "You expect me to front you a small fortune, based on what a good impression." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out as though considering her fate among the millions in the city. When he turned back, there was a faint smirk on his lips, the kind that never reached his eyes. "I could give you that money," he said slowly, "but nothing in business is free." The implication hung between them, sharp and ugly. Emily's pulse roared in her ears. She wanted to throw the coffee mug sitting on his desk at him, to tell him he was a vile man, but behind her eyelids was the image of Ethan, lying pale and small in his hospital bed, clutching the stuffed bear she had bought him on his 3rd birthday. She asked him to repeat himself, and he did the words as calm as if he were offering her a choice of wine at dinner. "One night with me, and the money is yours." He waited for the slap that never came. Instead, Emily gathered her folder and walked out without a word. Her heels clicking on the polished floor, she told herself she would never consider it. But the hours that followed were a blur of hospital updates and a call from the transplant coordinator that the donor match would not wait forever. If the funds were not secured within 72 hours, the marrow would be allocated to another patient. By the time midnight rolled around, the resolve she had clung to had crumbled. She texted Lucas a single line, "Where and when?" His reply was immediate. "Waldorf Astoria Suite, 2004, tomorrow night. Wear something you feel beautiful in." She stared at the glowing screen for a long time before turning it face down on the table. The next day she visited Ethan, bringing him a puzzle they could work on together. She told him she had to work late the next few nights, but that she would be back before he knew it. He smiled, trusting her completely. The lie lodged in her throat, but she forced it down. That night, as she zipped up the borrowed black dress in the mirror, she felt as though she were sealing herself into a version of herself she did not recognize. The reflection looked calm, the eyes dry, but inside, every nerve screamed. She placed the photo of Ethan face down on the dresser, unable to bear his gaze. Then she walked out into the cold night toward a bargain she never thought she would make. The hotel suite had the muted elegance of money, well-spent plush cream carpets that seemed to swallow every step and floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the endless city lights. Emily stood just inside the door, her fingers curled around the strap of her bag, as if it were the only thing tethering her to reality. Lucas was by the minibar pouring a drink, the sound of ice against glass crisp in the stillness. He did not look at her right away, which gave her time to steady her breathing and tell herself that this was only a transaction, nothing more. He turned finally, his gaze sweeping over her in a way that made her skin prickle. He offered her a glass of wine, which she declined, her voice quiet but firm. For a man who thrived on control, Lucas found himself oddly uncertain. The women who came into his life usually played the game with practiced ease, leaning into the seduction or the tension. But Emily stood there like someone passing through a storm, intent only on reaching the other side. They spoke little that night, their words clipped and practical. When he touched her, it was with a strange caution, as if he were testing the edges of something fragile. Later, when she lay in the dim light, listening to the muted hum of traffic from below, she felt no victory, only a hollow ache. At dawn, she slipped out of bed, collected the envelope from the table where he had left it, and left without a note. She walked straight to the hospital where the transplant coordinator was waiting and handed over the cashier's check. The relief on the woman's face was mirrored in Emily's own, though it was tempered by exhaustion. Ethan's surgery was scheduled for 2 days later, and Emily spent every waking moment by his side, reading to him or holding his hand. Through the long hours of preparation, at the office, she returned to her desk as if nothing had happened. But Lucas noticed the difference. She avoided his gaze in meetings, kept her answers short, and never lingered in the same space with him longer than necessary. It unsettled him more than he expected. On a Tuesday morning, he called her into his office under the pretense of reviewing a client proposal. She stood across from his desk, her posture straight, her expression neutral as he asked about a design detail that he already knew the answer to. He found himself studying the way she held her pen between her fingers, the slight tilt of her head when she listened. Later that week, they were both sent to Los Angeles to meet a difficult client, a man notorious for rejecting every pitch put in front of him. Lucas expected the meeting to drag into another failure, but Emily surprised him. She spoke with quiet authority, weaving in design elements that tied directly to the client's personal history details she had uncovered through meticulous research. By the time she finished, the man was leaning forward, his skepticism replaced by genuine interest. When the deal was signed, Lucas watched Emily from across the table, a flicker of admiration softening his usually guarded eyes. That evening at the hotel bar, he asked her to join him for a drink. She hesitated, then agreed, perhaps out of politeness. The conversation started with work but gradually drifted toward more personal ground. She told him about her love for old architecture, how she would walk through neighborhoods sketching facades in a worn notebook. He told her about the summer he spent backpacking through Europe before taking over the family company. There was a brief moment when their hands brushed as they both reached for the same napkin and something unspoken passed between them. Emily pulled back quickly, her cheeks warming. She reminded herself of the bargain they had made and the reasons behind it. Lucas noticed the shift and let the silence settle between them without pressing further. Back in New York, their professional interactions continued, but there was a subtle change. Lucas began finding reasons to involve her in high-profile projects, inviting her into strategy sessions, usually reserved for senior staff. Once during a site visit to a construction project, a sudden rainstorm forced them to take shelter in a half-finished hallway. They stood shoulder to shoulder watching sheets of water cascade off the unfinished roof. For a long moment, neither spoke. The scent of wet concrete filled the air, and the closeness between them felt like something they both understood, but neither dared to name. Later, Emily would tell herself it was just weather, just circumstance. Yet that night, as she sat by Ethan's bed and watched him sleep, she found her thoughts drifting to the way Lucas had glanced at her during that rainstorm, a look that held no calculation, no transaction, only something she could not define. Lucas, too, found himself unsettled. He had built his life on sharp lines and clear deals, yet with Emily those lines blurred. She was the only person in recent memory who had not tried to impress him or use him. She simply did her job and left. It made him want to know what she looked like when she laughed without restraint, what her eyes would hold if she ever let down the wall he could feel surrounding her. The bond forming between them was slow and quiet, built in the spaces between meetings in shared glances over architectural plans and in the unspoken understanding that sometimes the smallest moments left the deepest marks. A month after the Los Angeles trip, Ethan was recovering well from his transplant, his small body slowly gaining strength as the color returned to his cheeks. Emily kept her work and personal life rigidly separated, still determined that no one at Grant Developments would know about her son. She feared the company's policies, and more than that, she feared Lucas knowing too much. But secrets have a way of slipping into the open. One Thursday evening, Lucas attended a charity gala for a pediatric cancer foundation held at a midtown hotel. He was there at the insistence of a business partner who sat on the board of the organization, and he expected nothing more than the usual speeches and silent auctions. The ballroom glowed with warm light, the air filled with the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. As Lucas stood near the back, listening half-heartedly to the MC, a story began to unfold on stage. The speaker, a doctor from St. Mary's Hospital, described a little boy named Ethan who had nearly lost his chance at a life-saving bone marrow transplant because the funds were not available in time. The audience was silent as the doctor explained that thanks to a last-minute donation, the full amount had been paid just days before the procedure. The boy was now on the road to recovery. The MC then gestured toward the volunteer check-in table, where the child's mother was working quietly, greeting guests and handing out programs. Lucas followed the gesture, his eyes landing on a familiar figure in a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back. Her smile polite but tired. It was Emily. For a moment, he thought he must be mistaken, but the tilt of her head, the graceful way she moved, confirmed what his mind was already screaming. The pieces slammed together in his head, the envelope he had left in the hotel suite. The cashier's check, the urgency in her voice that day in his office. She had not been desperate for herself. She had been desperate for Ethan, and Ethan was her son. A sharp ache bloomed in Lucas's chest as the full weight of his misjudgment crashed down on him. All this time he had seen her through the narrow lens of his own cynicism, assuming she was like every other person who had tried to use him. Now he saw her standing there volunteering for the very cause that had nearly taken her child away, if not for her sacrifice. He began moving toward her, weaving through the crowd, but she spotted him before he could reach her. Her smile faltered, her eyes widened, and in an instant, she was excusing herself from the table, slipping out through a side door. Lucas followed into the cooler quiet of the hallway, his footsteps echoing against marble. Emily stopped only when she reached a corner away from the flow of guests. Her back was straight, her hands clenched at her sides. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice low, rougher than he intended. She met his gaze, unflinching. "Because it wasn't your business. You made it my business the moment you walked into that hotel room," he said. Her eyes flashed. "No, you made it a business transaction, and I paid the price. Now we are even." She turned to leave, but he stepped in her path, not close enough to touch her, but close enough that she could see the regret in his eyes. "I was wrong," Lucas said simply. "I thought you were someone else." "You thought I was someone you could buy," she replied. There was no anger in her tone, only a deep tiredness. Lucas searched for words, but found none that could undo what had been done. Emily brushed past him and walked away, her heels clicking a steady rhythm that echoed in his chest long after she was gone. That night, Lucas lay awake, replaying every interaction, every moment, when he could have seen the truth if he had looked harder. The memory of her walking into the hotel suite, calm on the surface, but carrying the weight of her son's life, now cut deeper than he could have imagined. Lucas tried to keep his focus on work in the days after the gala, but Emily's face in that hallway kept intruding on every meeting, every conversation. He had built a career on seeing through people, and now the one woman he thought he understood had proven him completely wrong. He sent her an email requesting a private meeting, which she ignored. He called her into his office under the guise of reviewing project timelines, but she kept her answers clipped, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her. Finally, he went to her desk late one evening when most of the staff had gone home. Emily looked up startled as he stood there, coat over one arm. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "You already gave me what I needed," Emily replied, not unkindly, just firmly. "There's nothing else I want from you." That was the moment Lucas realized that for the first time in years, what he wanted could not be bought. He left without pressing her further, but fate had its own ideas. 2 weeks later, Emily's life tilted again when her former in-laws arrived unannounced at her apartment. Robert Whitmore and his wife Margaret stood in the doorway dressed as if they had stepped out of a country club brochure. They claimed concern for Ethan's well-being, citing her long work hours and the stress of his recovery. Their true motive became clear when Robert handed her legal papers, a petition for custody. They wanted to take Ethan to live with them in Connecticut, claiming they could provide a stable environment and better medical care. Emily's stomach dropped. She knew the Whitmores' wealth and connections could make a strong case in court. They had never accepted her, but they had always doted on Ethan in their own distant way, perhaps now seeing him as their last tie to their son. That same week, Lucas was hit with his own storm. A major construction site owned by Grant Developments suffered a scaffolding collapse, injuring 2 workers. Though the injuries were not life-threatening, the incident made headlines, and a rival developer seized the opportunity to paint Lucas as negligent and reckless. Lawsuits were filed, reporters camped outside the office, and shareholders began to question his leadership. In the midst of this chaos, Lucas heard from Claire in accounting that Emily had been served custody papers. He left a board meeting without explanation and showed up at her apartment that evening. She opened the door with shadows under her eyes and a stack of legal documents on the table behind her. "I can help you," he said before she could speak. Her instinct was to refuse, but the truth was, she had no idea how to fight the Whitmores alone. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch," he replied. "Just let me connect you with the best family law attorney in the city. And there's something else. I want you to work directly with me on the Midtown Tower project. It's high profile, and it will keep you visible. The more the court sees you as indispensable in your career, the stronger your case for stability becomes." Emily hesitated. Working closely with Lucas meant reopening a door she had firmly shut. But losing Ethan was not an option. She agreed. The weeks that followed were a blur of 12-hour days spent in design meetings, site visits, and strategy sessions. Lucas was everywhere, not in the way of a boss monitoring an employee, but as a constant presence, quietly supportive. He never mentioned the night at the Waldorf Astoria, never brought up the money or the past. Instead, he focused on the work and on making sure she had every resource she needed for the custody battle. Still, the strain showed. One Friday evening, Emily arrived at the hospital to find Ethan sitting in bed, clutching his stuffed bear, tears streaking his cheeks. He had overheard a phone call between Emily and her lawyer, and now knew his grandparents were trying to take him away. Emily tried to soothe him, but the damage was done. When Lucas arrived minutes later with a bag of Lego sets he had picked up on the way, Ethan ran to him sobbing. Lucas knelt down, wrapping the boy in his arms, and promising in a steady voice that no one was going to take him from his mom. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Emily stepped into the hallway to find Lucas leaning against the wall, his hands in his pockets. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Because I can," he said, "and because I want to." The look in his eyes made it clear that this was no longer about debt or obligation. But the world outside was not finished with them. A tabloid ran a front-page story linking Lucas to a scandal involving bribes to city officials. The allegations were false, but they fed into the narrative his rivals had been building. Investors pulled back, deals were delayed, and his legal troubles deepened. Emily worried that the connection to Lucas might hurt her case, yet she found herself defending him. To anyone who spoke against him, Late one night, after reviewing documents for the Midtown Tower project, Lucas admitted to her that his own childhood had been a battlefield. His mother had controlled every aspect of his life, from his clothes to his career path. Trusting people had never brought him anything but loss. "Until you," he said quietly. Emily did not reply, but the admission lingered between them, unspoken and undeniable. Still the pressure mounted. The custody hearing loomed. Lucas's legal battles intensified, and in the middle of it all, both of them faced the possibility that the fragile peace they had built could shatter with a single blow. The first day of the custody hearing arrived with a sharp wind cutting through the streets of Manhattan. Emily stood outside the courthouse in a charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back in a simple twist. Ethan was at the hospital for a routine checkup under the care of a nurse she trusted. Lucas appeared beside her without a word, his presence solid and unshakable. Inside the courtroom, the Whitmores sat with their high-priced attorney, radiating quiet confidence. They presented themselves as the picture of stability, speaking of country estate and private tutors of their ability to provide a better life than a single mother could. Emily's attorney countered with her professional achievements, her consistent care for Ethan, and letters from doctors affirming his progress under her watch. But it was clear the Whitmores' wealth and influence weighed heavily in the judge's consideration. During a recess, Emily stepped into the hallway, her hands trembling. Lucas joined her, handing her a bottle of water. "They are playing to the judge's sense of security," he said quietly. "We need to show that Ethan's emotional well-being depends on you." "How do we do that?" she asked. "Let me speak," Lucas said. The next day he took the stand. The Whitmores' attorney tried to paint him as a playboy CEO, entangled in scandals. But Lucas spoke plainly about what he had seen. He described Ethan's face lighting up when his mother walked into the room, how Emily balanced work and hospital visits without complaint, how she fought for her son with every breath. He admitted that when he first met her, he misjudged her badly, but that his respect for her had only grown. His voice did not waver even when the opposing attorney pressed him on the nature of their relationship. She saved her son's life by making a choice. "Most of us could not imagine having to make," he said. "That is not a weakness, that is strength." In the gallery, Emily felt tears prick her eyes. The judge listened intently, and for the first time, she sensed the momentum shift. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Lucas ignored them, focusing only on getting Emily safely to a waiting car. That night, Emily found Lucas sitting in the hospital playroom with Ethan building a Lego skyscraper. They were both laughing at a design flaw that caused the top floors to tilt. The sight lodged itself deep in her chest. Over the following week, Lucas continued to be a fixture not only in the courtroom, but in Ethan's world. He brought puzzles and art supplies, visited during chemotherapy sessions, and talked to Ethan about architecture and baseball. One evening, a storm rolled in just as Emily was leaving the hospital. She stepped outside to find Lucas waiting with an umbrella. Without thinking, she stepped under it, their shoulders brushing as they walked. In that quiet moment, she realized how much he had become part of her life. The final day of the hearing began with the Whitmores' attorney presenting financial documents and educational plans for Ethan. Emily's side responded with testimony from teachers, nurses, and neighbors. When the judge returned with a decision, the tension was unbearable. Custody would remain with Emily, the judge said, citing not only her ability to provide, but the clear emotional bond between mother and child. The Whitmores were granted visitation rights, but the victory was decisive. Relief flooded Emily so sharply she swayed on her feet. Lucas caught her, steadying her with a hand on her back. As they walked out of the courthouse, flashbulbs erupted and questions flew. One reporter shouted about the bribery scandal swirling around Lucas. In that moment, Lucas turned to face the crowd, his voice firm. "For the record, Emily Parker is the most capable mother I have ever met. She deserves your respect, not your speculation." It was a public defense that risked fueling the rumors about them. But Lucas did not seem to care. That evening they celebrated quietly in Emily's small apartment with Chinese takeout. Ethan sat between them on the couch, telling a long, winding story about a dragon who built houses out of clouds. Lucas listened with an attentiveness that made Emily's heart ache, in a way she had not felt in years. Later, when Ethan was asleep, she found Lucas in the kitchen rinsing dishes. "You did not have to put yourself in the middle of this," she said. "I wanted to," he replied simply, and in that moment, Emily understood that he had made a choice, not for business, not for appearances, but for her and Ethan. It was a choice that carried weight, the kind of decision that shifted the ground beneath everything that came after. The weeks after the custody ruling unfolded with a strange mixture of calm and quiet rebuilding. For the first time in months, Emily could sleep without waking in the middle of the night in a panic over court dates or medical bills. Ethan's health was slowly stabilizing, his energy returning in bursts that often had him running circles around the small living room. Lucas kept his distance at first, letting Emily have space, but he never disappeared entirely. He called to check on Ethan, sent her articles about architecture competitions, and once left a bouquet of sunflowers outside her door with no note. The bribery scandal that had plagued him began to unravel when evidence surfaced showing his rival developer had planted the story. Lucas won the defamation suit, and the victory seemed to lift a weight from his shoulders. One afternoon, he called Emily to ask if she could meet him at a building site in Brooklyn. Curious, she agreed, and brought Ethan along, thinking it would be a short visit. The site was an old red brick warehouse, tucked between modern apartment buildings, its windows boarded and roof sagging, but Lucas's eyes lit with possibility as he explained his plan. He wanted to transform the space into a community center focused on children recovering from serious illnesses, offering tutoring play areas and on-site medical support. "I want it to be a place where no parent ever has to choose between work and their child's care," he said. Emily felt something shift inside her at the thought. He asked her to be the lead architect for the project, not as a favor, but because he trusted her vision. Ethan immediately claimed the future playroom as his territory, running through the dusty open space, with laughter echoing off the bare walls. Over the next several months, Emily threw herself into the project. She and Lucas spent long hours together, reviewing blueprints, sourcing sustainable materials, and working with community leaders to shape the center's programs. There were moments of frustration when permits stalled or budgets threatened to spiral, but those challenges only seemed to draw them closer. Lucas learned to read the subtle signs of her stress and would show up with coffee or take her out for a walk when she needed air. Emily discovered that behind his guarded exterior was a man who valued loyalty and who carried the scars of a childhood shaped by control and loneliness. They began sharing more of their personal histories in quiet moments. Emily spoke of her marriage to Daniel Whitmore, how it had started with whirlwind romance and ended with silent resentment long before the accident took his life. Lucas told her about growing up in a house where every choice was dictated by his mother, from the clothes he wore to the college he attended. It was why he had built walls so high, and why letting her in felt both dangerous and inevitable. As the center took shape, so did something between them that neither had dared to name. One evening in late summer, they stood on the rooftop of the renovated building, watching the sun sink behind the skyline. The brick was warm from the day's heat, the air carrying the scent of fresh paint. "You have built something remarkable here," Lucas said quietly. "We have," Emily corrected him, her eyes meeting his. There was a long pause, a current running between them. Then Lucas stepped closer, and for the first time since that night at the Waldorf Astoria, his touch was not part of a bargain, but a choice. His hand brushed hers, fingers curling gently, and she did not pull away. When the center opened in the fall, the neighborhood turned out in force. There were balloons strung along the entryway, music spilling into the street, and the sound of children's laughter filling the air. Ethan wore a little suit for the ribbon cutting and beamed when Lucas knelt to let him hold the oversized scissors. Emily stood to the side, watching them with a sense of fullness she had not felt in years. After the speeches and tours, the three of them slipped away to the rooftop where they could hear the party below but not see it. Ethan leaned against Emily's side, already tired from the excitement. Lucas looked at her, then at Ethan, and said, "This place is only the beginning. I want to be part of both your lives if you'll let me." Emily felt the truth of it settle deep in her chest. This was not about rescue anymore. It was about partnership, about building something lasting from the broken pieces they had carried. Winter came, and with it, new routines. Lucas often joined them for dinner, bringing groceries and helping Ethan with homework. On weekends, they explored the city together, visiting museums and parks. There were still challenges days when Ethan's health wavered, or when Lucas's business demanded his full attention, but the foundation they had built held steady. One snowy evening, Emily found herself standing in her kitchen, watching Lucas and Ethan assemble a gingerbread house. Lucas was covered in flour, Ethan's laughter ringing out as candy slid off the slanted roof. It was messy, imperfect, and perfect all at once. Emily realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped guarding her heart against him. He had earned his place, not with grand gestures, but with consistency and care. In early spring, Lucas suggested a weekend trip to Long Island, just the three of them. They rented a small cottage near the beach where Ethan spent hours chasing waves and building sandcastles. One night after Ethan had fallen asleep, Lucas and Emily sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the ocean. "I used to think home was something you could buy," Lucas said. "Now I know it's something you choose every day." Emily turned to him, a smile tugging at her lips. "And what have you chosen?" she asked. "You and Ethan," he said without hesitation. The words settled over them like the tide, steady and certain. They kissed, then under the sound of the waves, and for the first time, Emily let herself imagine a future without the shadow of the past. Spring gave way to summer, and the community center in Brooklyn became a living testament to what determination and compassion could build. The walls that had once been cracked and bare now held bright murals painted by local artists. The sound of children's voices spilled out into the street every afternoon, mixing with the hum of the city. Emily oversaw new programs while Lucas managed the financial backing that kept the doors open. Ethan flourished there, making friends who understood the long hospital visits and the quiet bravery it took to face each day. On a warm Saturday in July, Lucas suggested they take a short drive to Long Island for the weekend. Emily agreed, not realizing that he had something else planned. The beach house he rented was small and unassuming, with wide windows that opened to the sea. The first evening they walked along the shoreline as Ethan darted ahead collecting shells. The sun dipped low, painting the water in gold and rose. Lucas slowed his pace until they were a few steps behind Ethan. "I am not a man who asks for much," he said, his voice quiet over the rush of waves. "But I am asking for this. I want to spend my life with you and with him. No contracts, no bargains, just us." Emily felt her chest tighten, the words hitting places she had long kept locked. She thought of the night she walked into his hotel suite with desperation as her only companion, and of every moment since that had chipped away at the walls around her heart. She nodded, unable to speak, and Lucas's hand found hers warm and steady. The next day, under a clear blue sky, with only the ocean and a few close friends as witnesses, they exchanged vows on the sand. There were no elaborate decorations, just the salt air and the sound of waves. Ethan stood between them, holding both their hands, his grin wide and unrestrained. When the officiant pronounced them a family, Ethan threw his arms around them both, and for Emily the world stilled in the best way possible. That night they sat on the porch of the beach house, watching the stars emerge one by one. Emily leaned into Lucas, her head on his shoulder. "You did not just save my son," she said softly. "You saved me." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "Home is not a place," he murmured. "It is wherever you and Ethan are." The ocean breeze carried their laughter into the night, mingling with the steady rhythm of the tide. And as the waves rolled in and out, Emily knew they had not returned to the lives they had before. They had built something entirely new together, strong enough to weather whatever storms might come next.